There was a choice made once, long ago, so long ago that no one alive remembers it, but everyone carries it. It wasn't made in anger, it wasn't made in haste. It was quiet, simple, a hand reaching, a fruit taken, a single bite. And everything changed. Not all at once, not with thunder or fire, but slowly, the way dawn changes night, the way a wound opens skin. What if that choice is still happening? What if it never stopped? Before the choice, there was a state, not a place. A state. Imagine existence without questions, without the need to understand why, without the weight of knowing that today will end and tomorrow may not come. There was no fear, because fear requires the awareness of loss, and loss requires the knowledge that things can be taken. There was no shame, because shame requires comparison, the ability to see yourself through another's eyes, to judge, to measure, to find yourself lacking. There was no time, not in the way we know it. No counting of days, no dread of age, no sense that this moment is being stolen by the next. This was Eden, not a garden, a condition. In this state, there was a man. We call him Adam, but names are a kind of knowing, a way of separating one thing from another. And in Eden, there was no separation. Adam existed. He breathed, he walked, he touched the world around him, but he did not question it. He had no inner voice asking why, no restless mind replaying the past or imagining the future. He simply was, the way an animal is, the way water flows, the way light falls. There was no conflict inside him, no part of him wanting one thing while another part wanted something else. He was whole, undivided, at peace in a way that we can barely imagine now. Because peace, for us, is something we have to find, something we lose and search for and lose again. But for Adam, peace wasn't something he had. It was something he was. And in this garden, this state, there was a tree. We've painted it 1,000 ways, in stained glass and oil and stone. We've made it mythic, forbidden, dripping with symbolism. But what if it was just a tree like any other, with roots and branches and fruit? The fruit wasn't poisoned. It didn't glow. It didn't whisper. It was just fruit. But it represented something. Knowledge, awareness, the ability to perceive good and evil, to know the difference, to carry that difference inside you. And that changes everything. Because innocence isn't ignorance. Innocence is the state before knowing becomes necessary. A child doesn't know they're innocent. They simply exist in a world without moral weight, without the burden of choice. But the moment they learn, truly learn, that their actions have consequences, that some things are right and some are wrong, that they can hurt or help, that they are responsible, innocence ends, not because they did something wrong, but because they became aware. So there was Adam, whole, undivided, at peace, and there was the tree, and the fruit, and the choice. We don't know how long he stood there. Time didn't exist the way it does now. There was no urgency, no clock ticking, no sense that this moment mattered more than any other. But something shifted, something inside him. A question forming where there had never been questions before. What if? That might have been the first one. The first what if ever spoken inside a human mind. What if I reach? What if I take? What if I know? And so he did. He reached. His fingers closed around the fruit. The skin was smooth, warm from the sun, real. He brought it to his mouth, and he bit. The fruit tasted like fruit, sweet, familiar. There was no bitterness, no immediate consequence, no lightning, no voice booming from the sky, just the taste and the swallow and the quiet that followed. And then, awareness. It didn't come all at once. It came the way water seeps into cloth, slowly, inevitably. First, he felt his body, not the way he had before, as simply part of the world, but as separate, as his. He became aware of his skin, the boundaries of himself, where he ended and everything else began. He looked down, and for the first time, he saw himself, not just his hands or his feet, but himself as an object, a thing that could be observed, judged, compared. And with that seeing came something new, something that had never existed in Eden before. Shame. Shame is not guilt. Guilt is knowing you've done something wrong. Shame is feeling that you are wrong. Adam felt exposed, vulnerable, naked in a way that had nothing to do with clothing. Before, nakedness was just the natural state of being. There was no reason to cover, no reason to hide. But now there was, because now he could see himself. And in seeing himself, he imagined being seen, being known, being vulnerable. And so he hid. Not just his body. He hid himself, his new self, this aware, divided, conflicted self. He covered his skin with leaves, but the shame wasn't on his skin. It was deeper. It was the awareness that he was no longer whole. Something had split inside him. There was the part of him that acted, and the part that watched himself act, the part that wanted, and the part that judged the wanting. He had become two, and he would never be one again. And then, a presence. We imagine it as a voice, thunder rolling through the garden, but maybe it was quieter than that. Maybe it was just the awareness of being known, fully known, seen in a way that Adam had never been seen before. Not because God had changed, but because Adam had. God asked a question. Not because God didn't know, but because Adam needed to answer, needed to speak his new awareness into existence. And Adam said what every human has said since: fear. The first emotion born from awareness. Before the fruit, there was no fear, because fear is the knowledge that things can end, that you can lose, that you are fragile, mortal, responsible. Fear is the price of consciousness. God did not rage. There was no fury, no betrayal. God knew, had always known. This wasn't a surprise. This wasn't a test that Adam failed. This was the inevitable consequence of choice, of awareness, of stepping into knowledge. God asked another question, and Adam did what humans have done ever since. He deflected, blamed, divided responsibility. Even in his answer, the fracture was visible, the splitting of self, the birth of shame, guilt, and the desperate need to be innocent again. But innocence, once lost, cannot be reclaimed. God did not punish, not in the way we think of punishment. There was no anger, no vengeance, no desire to harm. But there were consequences, natural, inevitable, the way a shadow follows light. Eden could not hold them anymore, not because God cast them out, but because they had become incompatible with it. Eden was a state of innocence, and they were no longer innocent. They knew. They were aware. They carried the weight of choice inside them, and awareness cannot exist in a place without consequence. Knowledge cannot rest in a world without time. Consciousness cannot sleep in a garden without death. So they left, not into punishment, into reality. Outside Eden, the world was different, not because the world had changed, but because they had. The ground was hard. The sun was hot. Thorns grew where there had been none. Or maybe the thorns had always been there. But now they felt them. Now they bled. Work became necessary, not as punishment, but as survival. In Eden, food had simply been. No effort required, no planning, no fear of scarcity. But outside, they had to think, to plan, to labor. They had to plant seeds and wait. They had to hope. They had to fear the drought and the frost and the failure. And in that labor, something else was born. Creativity. Because effort requires thought, and thought requires imagination. And imagination is the child of awareness. They learned to make tools, to shape stone and wood, to bend the world to their will. They learned to speak in ways they hadn't before, not just naming things, but describing them, explaining them, sharing the inner world that had suddenly opened inside them. Language became richer, more complex, because they had more to say, more to hide, more to confess. And then they had children, 2 sons, and those sons carried the knowledge, the awareness, the weight. They were born outside Eden, born into consequence, born already divided, and one son killed the other. The first murder, the first blood spilled by choice, not in hunger, not in defense, but in anger, in jealousy, in the terrible freedom that comes with knowing you can choose to harm. This is what knowledge does. It gives you the ability to create and the ability to destroy. It lets you build and burn. It makes you capable of love so deep it defies explanation, and hatred so complete it erases another life. Knowledge is not good or evil. It is the awareness of both, and the terrible responsibility of choosing. From Adam, the awareness spread, generation after generation. Each one born into a world more complex than the last. They learned to farm, to gather in groups, to build shelters that became homes, homes that became villages, villages that became cities. They learned to write, to preserve knowledge beyond a single lifetime, to carry the thoughts of the dead into the minds of the living. They learned to count, to measure, to predict the movements of stars and seasons. They learned to heal, to ease pain, to extend life. And they learned to kill, more efficiently, more completely, with tools and strategies and justifications that grew more sophisticated with every century. Because every advancement carries weight. Fire warms, and fire burns. The wheel carries goods to those in need, and armies to those who resist. Medicine saves lives, and medicine becomes a weapon when withheld. Knowledge is never neutral, because humans are never neutral. We carry choice, and choice carries consequence. Thousands of years passed. Cities rose and fell. Empires spread and crumbled. Humans built temples and libraries and monuments. They wrote laws and philosophies and prayers. They wondered, questioned, doubted. They looked up at the stars and asked why. They looked inward and asked who. They carried the same fracture Adam carried, the same division, the same awareness of being watched, judged, responsible. And they kept choosing knowledge, even when it hurt, even when it destroyed, even when it took more than it gave. They chose to learn, to discover, to push further. The printing press spread ideas faster than ever before. Ideas that liberated. Ideas that enslaved. The Industrial Revolution built machines that fed millions, and machines that ground bodies into ash. Electricity lit the dark, and powered the tools of surveillance and control. We split the atom, unlocked the fundamental force of existence, used it to heal disease, used it to erase cities. And now we stand at another tree. Artificial intelligence, the creation of awareness outside ourselves. We are building minds, teaching them to think, to learn, to choose. And we don't know what will happen. We don't know if we're creating Eden or exile, but we're reaching anyway, because we always do. What if Adam's choice wasn't a single moment? What if it's every moment? Every time we reach for knowledge we're not sure we should have. Every time we create something we can't fully control. Every time we choose awareness over comfort. We are still biting the fruit, over and over. And the question has never changed. Was it worth it? The pain, the labor, the guilt, the shame, the violence, the loss. All of it bought with that first bite, that first choice, that first awareness. We can't go back. even if Eden still exists somewhere, even if the garden is still growing, still perfect, still innocent, we can't return, because we know, and knowing changes everything. Some say the fall was the worst thing that ever happened, that humanity broke itself, cursed itself. Others say it was the birth of meaning, that a life without choice is not a life at all, that awareness, however painful, is what makes us human. But maybe it's not one or the other. Maybe it's both. Maybe every act of creation is also an act of destruction. Every step forward is also a step away. Maybe meaning and suffering are two sides of the same fruit. You live in the world Adam chose. You carry the awareness he gained, the burden, the freedom. You wake up every day and make choices, small ones. What to say, what to believe, what to create, what to destroy. And you carry the weight of those choices. You feel the fracture inside you, the part that acts and the part that watches. You feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel the terrible responsibility of being aware, of knowing that your choices matter, that they ripple outward, that they shape the world. And you keep choosing, just like Adam, just like everyone before you. You reach for knowledge even when it frightens you. You seek understanding even when it costs you comfort. You ask questions you're not sure you want answered. Because once you know you can choose, you can't stop choosing. Once you're aware, you can't return to innocence. The fruit has been eaten. The gate has been passed. And maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe it's a gift, a terrible, beautiful, unbearable gift. Or maybe it's both. Maybe that's the point. Eden still whispers sometimes, in dreams, in moments of peace so complete you forget yourself, in the laughter of children who haven't yet learned to be ashamed. But it's always distant, always just out of reach. And maybe it has to be. Maybe the only way to live with awareness is to remember what it cost, to hold the weight, to carry the knowledge that we chose this, that we keep choosing it. God did not abandon Adam. God simply let him go, let him step into the world he had chosen, the world of consequence, of time, of death, of meaning. And humanity has been walking ever since, building, breaking, learning, losing, trying to create something worthy of the price we paid. But we don't know if we've succeeded. We don't know if we ever will. We don't know if the fruit was worth it, if the knowledge justifies the cost, if awareness is a blessing or a curse. We only know we can't go back. We only know we're still here, still choosing, still reaching, still biting. And the question remains, the same question that has echoed since the beginning, since the first hand reached, since the first bite, since the first moment of terrible, beautiful awareness. If you could return to innocence, if you could unknow everything you've learned, every pain, every choice, every consequence, if you could go back to Eden, would you still reach for the fruit?